What is the most common lie people tell? Story 1. The other day I called customer service about a double charge on my credit card. After pressing 37 buttons and shouting representative into the void, I finally got the hold message. Your call is important to us. Yeah, sure it is. 35 minutes later I was still important, but apparently not that important. When the agent finally answered, I'd forgotten why I called and just blurted out, "Can I cancel my life subscription instead?" There was a long pause before she said, "I'll transfer you to billing." Story 2. My roommate ate the last slice of pizza I had been saving for 2 days. When I confronted him, he hit me with, "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind." I said, "I'm not mad, just disappointed." Which was true until I filled his shampoo bottle with ketchup. Now I'm definitely mad, but at least I'm entertained. Story 3. My buddy has never been 5 minutes away in his life. Once we were carpooling to a concert and he texted, "Pulling up now." I looked outside and saw nothing. Called him and he cheerfully said, "Just need to grab my keys." 15 minutes later, he showed up with a coffee and no explanation. I'm convinced he measures time in dog years. Story 4. The other day at work, my boss asked how I was doing, and I sarcastically said, "Living the dream." He smiled and said, "Good, because we're adding 2 more projects to your plate." Lesson learned, never lie to your boss. Now I just say, "Barely surviving," and hope he pities me. Story 5. I texted a girl I liked and got no reply for 2 days. When she finally answered with, "Sorry, just seeing this now," I checked her Instagram. She had posted 6 stories, liked a dozen pics, and commented, "So cute," on a cat meme. Yeah, sure, you just saw it. I felt ghosted, but I guess she's Casper now. Story 6. After my dad passed away last year, "I'm fine" became my default answer to everything. People at work would ask how I was, and without missing a beat, I'd reply, "Fine." My friends would check in, and I'd say, "Yeah, I'm good. Don't worry about me." The truth? I was drowning. But admitting that felt too messy, too vulnerable. One day my coworker, Sarah, cornered me in the break room. "You don't look fine," she said bluntly. I tried to brush her off, but she wouldn't let it go. Finally, I broke down and told her everything. She listened without judgment, and for the first time I realized how exhausting it was to keep pretending. After that, I started being honest, at least with the people I trusted. When someone asked how I was doing, I'd say, "Not great, but I'm getting through it." It wasn't easy, but it was freeing. Now, "I'm fine" is a phrase I only use when it's the truth. And when it's not, I've learned that letting people see the cracks doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Story 7. You know that classic lie, "I'll be there in 5 minutes"? Yeah, my brother has made it his personal mantra. He's the kind of guy who'll text that when he's still in his pajamas, hasn't showered, and the drive itself takes at least 30 minutes. Once we were meeting for a family dinner, and he hit us with the usual "on my way" text. 45 minutes later, we're all sitting around staring at a cooling casserole, wondering where the hell he is. I call him and he cheerfully says, "Just about to head out the door," which for him translates to, "I'll take another shower, scroll on my phone, and leave when I feel like it." That day my parents finally snapped. We ate without him, and when he showed up an hour late, we were already in the middle of dessert. He was annoyed, but my mom calmly said, "You're an adult now. If you can't respect our time, we'll stop waiting." The next time he pulled his 5-minute stunt, we didn't even bother checking where he was. By the time he arrived, the event was over, and he finally got it. Now he still says 5 minutes, but miraculously, it actually means 5 minutes. Story 8. Sorry, just seeing this now. I've typed that lie more times than I can count, but one time it came back to bite me in the worst way. A few months ago, a friend texted me asking for help moving some furniture. It wasn't urgent, so I opened the text, sighed at the thought of lugging a couch, and put my phone down. 3 days later, I realized I hadn't responded. I sent my go-to excuse, thinking all was well. Turns out he'd posted an Instagram story about moving solo and mentioned how he'd reached out to people who ghosted him. Ouch. When I saw him next, I apologized, admitting I saw the text but didn't reply because I wasn't in the mood. He laughed, but it was awkward, and I could tell it stung a bit. Since then, I've been brutally honest when I can't help, even if it's uncomfortable. Sorry, I can't today feels way better than pretending I didn't see it and risking friendships over something dumb like a text. Story 9. The lie that really gets me? Living the dream. It started as a joke at work, the kind of sarcastic answer you throw out when someone asks how you're doing. But after a while, it became a reflex, even when I wasn't joking. I'd say it during some of the lowest points in my life. Last year, for example, I was barely scraping by, working a dead-end job, behind on rent, and stuck in a toxic relationship. My coworker Maggie once called me out, "What dream are you living exactly?" I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. Was I trying to convince others, or myself? Eventually, things fell apart in the best way possible. I quit the job, ended the relationship, and started fresh. Now, when someone asks how I'm doing, I tell them the truth. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's rough, but at least it's real. Funny enough, now that I'm being honest, people actually listen. Story 10. My girlfriend asked me to help her rearrange the living room. "It'll only take a minute," she said. 4 hours, one dislocated pinky, and a mysterious leftover screw later, we'd successfully turned the couch 45 degrees. I've decided a minute actually means cancel your plans. Story 11. It'll only take a minute. My boss says that all the time, and it's the biggest lie in the office. Last week, he asked me to quickly troubleshoot a printer issue. Of course, it wasn't just a paper jam. It was a full-blown breakdown that needed hours of attention and a tech specialist. While I was elbows deep in printer parts, he strolled by and casually added, "Oh, and when you're done, can you look into why Janet's emails aren't sending?" Another 5-minute task that spiraled into a full afternoon of IT chaos. By the time I clocked out, I'd wasted an entire day on things that were supposed to only take a minute. Now, whenever he tries that line, I just smile and ask for specifics. If it's not worth my time, I push back. Funny how standing up for yourself feels like a minute well spent. Story 12. When someone says, "I'm not mad," you know it's a lie. I learned this the hard way during an argument with my girlfriend a few months ago. We were planning a weekend trip, and I had promised to handle booking the hotel, but life got busy, and I completely forgot. The night before we were supposed to leave, she casually asked for the reservation details. I froze. I confessed I hadn't booked anything yet, but assured her I'd figure it out. Her face didn't even flinch as she said, "I'm not mad. It's fine." Of course it was not fine. She went completely silent while I scrambled to find a last-minute place to stay. By the time I managed to book a dingy motel 30 minutes from our destination, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The next morning, as we were driving, she finally broke her silence. "You know, it's not about the hotel," she said. "It's about feeling like you don't take this seriously. I always have to be the responsible one." That hit me like a ton of bricks. I tried to explain that it wasn't intentional, but the damage was done. The trip ended up being awkward, and it took weeks of apologies and effort to get us back on good terms. Now I've learned 2 things. Never assume "I'm not mad" means someone isn't mad, and always book the damn hotel when you say you will. Story 13. When my best friend's dad passed away, I said what everyone says. "I'm here for you." But truthfully, I had no idea what that meant. I thought it was just the polite thing to say, a way to show I cared. I checked in a few times, sent a card, and figured she'd reach out if she needed me. Weeks went by, and I assumed she was coping. Then one night she called, crying, saying she felt completely alone. I froze. I realized that by saying, "I'm here for you," I'd put the ball in her court instead of actually showing up. From that night on, I made an effort. I stopped waiting for her to ask for help and started just being there, dropping off groceries, sitting with her in silence, or just texting random things to make her smile. It wasn't easy, but it taught me that being there for someone isn't about saying it, it's about proving it. Story 14. Every time I check that little box saying, I have read and agree to the terms and conditions. I know I'm lying. Who doesn't? But one time it came back to bite me in a way I never expected. I'd signed up for some random app that offered discounts at local stores. Everything seemed fine until I started noticing weird charges on my credit card. A couple of dollars here, $10 there. Turns out, buried in the fine print, I had agreed to a subscription I didn't even know existed. When I called customer service, they smugly pointed out that I'd accepted the terms. I was furious but couldn't argue. I ended up canceling my card and spent hours disputing the charges. Now, whenever I see that little checkbox, I still don't read the terms, but I hesitate, wondering what ticking it might cost me next time. Story 15. Nobody reads the terms and conditions, right? Except one time I blindly agreed to one for a free trial and ended up subscribed to a $1.50 a month meditation app. Ironically, the app promised to help me manage financial stress. I canceled it while hyperventilating. Best meditation of my life. Story 16. My best friend Jake has this habit of saying, "I'll be there in 5 minutes," which for him could mean anything from 15 minutes to 2 hours. One time we were meeting up for a camping trip, and I had explicitly told him we needed to leave by 4 p.m. sharp to make it to the site before dark. He texted at 3:55 saying, 5 minutes away. By 4:15 there was no sign of him. I called, and he casually said, "Oh yeah, just getting gas, be there soon." At 4:45 he finally showed up, with a coffee in hand and zero sense of urgency. We hit the road, but thanks to his lateness we got stuck in rush hour traffic and didn't reach the campsite until after dark. Setting up tents in the pitch black with flashlights and half a dozen mosquitoes buzzing in my ear was not the peaceful escape I'd envisioned. I was livid, but Jake just laughed it off, saying, "Hey, at least we're here." That was the last straw. I sat him down after the trip and told him his chronic lateness wasn't just annoying, it was disrespectful. To my surprise, he took it seriously. Since then, he's been better about showing up on time. It's not perfect, but at least now when he says 5 minutes, I can trust it's not code for whenever I feel like it. Story 17. I used to use the "sorry, I forgot to hit send" excuse all the time. It was my go-to way of avoiding awkward conversations or explaining why I didn't reply to a text. Once, my coworker asked for help on a project over the weekend, and I conveniently forgot to reply until Monday morning. I claimed I'd typed out a response, but never sent it. She gave me a weird look, but let it go. Later that week, I overheard her telling someone, "People who forget to hit send are just lying because they don't want to answer." My face turned bright red. I realized then how transparent that excuse really was. I stopped using it, but the damage was done. She never trusted me to follow through on anything after that. It was a hard lesson in how little lies can ruin credibility in ways you don't see coming. Story 18. The phrase "I'll be there in 5 minutes" is practically my brother's catchphrase, but it might as well mean I haven't even left the house yet. He's notorious for running late, so much so that the rest of us have built our schedules around it. But last Thanksgiving, his chronic lateness hit an all-time high. Dinner was scheduled for 6 p.m. sharp at my parents' house, a long-standing family tradition. Everyone knows my mom doesn't mess around when it comes to holiday meals. She spends the entire day in the kitchen, making sure everything is perfect. Around 5:45, my brother texted the family group chat, "Leaving now, be there in 5." My dad raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He's long since learned not to get his hopes up. By 6:15, the appetizers were out, and there was still no sign of him. Mom was trying to keep things calm, but you could see the irritation bubbling under her polite smile. At 6:30, I called him. He answered with his usual carefree tone, "Oh, I'm just getting gas. Be there in 5." I felt my blood pressure spike. Gas? He hadn't even left town yet. I could hear his blinker clicking as he casually said, "Don't start without me." I hung up, walked back into the dining room, and told my parents the truth. He's not going to be here for at least another 30 minutes. My mom's jaw tightened, and I knew this was going to be the moment she'd had enough. At 6:45, she made the call. Dinner was starting. The table was set, candles lit, and we dug in. My brother finally showed up at 7:10, walking in with a sheepish grin and an armful of store-bought dinner rolls. "Sorry, traffic was crazy," he lied, as though we didn't know he'd left way too late to begin with. But instead of the usual teasing or passive-aggressive comments, my mom just said, "We've already eaten." He looked stunned, like he couldn't believe we hadn't waited. For years, we had always adjusted to him, making excuses or delaying plans. This time, we didn't. It was awkward at first. He sat down to a cold plate while the rest of us started on dessert, but it was a wake-up call. After dinner, my mom sat him down and calmly explained how disrespectful his behavior was. She didn't yell, didn't guilt him, she just laid it out. When you're late, it's not just about you. It's about everyone else who planned their time around you and had to wait. To his credit, he listened. The next family gathering, he showed up on time, early even, with a bottle of wine and an apology. He still slips up now and then, but it's clear he's trying. And when he does text 5 minutes away, we know he actually means it. Turns out sometimes the only way to fix a bad habit is to let the person face the consequences. Story 19. Good, how are you? It's the automatic response we all give, even when life is a dumpster fire. But last year I hit a breaking point. I was going through a brutal divorce and barely holding it together at work. One morning my manager asked me how I was, and I just couldn't lie anymore. "Terrible," I said, tears welling up before I could stop them. He looked stunned and kind of panicked. I apologized for oversharing, but he surprised me by saying, "It's okay not to be okay." That moment shifted something in me. I stopped pretending everything was fine and started being honest when people asked. Not everyone was comfortable with it. Some coworkers avoided me altogether, but others stepped up in ways I never expected. Turns out admitting you're not okay doesn't scare off the right people. It brings them closer. Story 20. You know when someone says, "It won't take long," they're lying. My brother roped me into helping him fix his leaky faucet a few months ago, claiming it'd be a quick job. I should have known better. What started as a simple washer replacement turned into a 5-hour ordeal involving trips to the hardware store, water spraying all over the kitchen, and an emergency call to his neighbor for help. By the end of it, we had replaced half the plumbing under the sink. The worst part? When it was finally done, he looked at me and said, "See? That wasn't so bad." I wanted to strangle him. Now, every time he asks for help with a quick fix, I remind him of the faucet incident and politely decline. It's become a running joke in our family, but honestly, I'd rather spend my weekend doing anything else than falling for another one of his lies. Story 21. I was in the checkout line at a grocery store when the cashier asked how I was doing. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Living the dream, right?" He paused, gave me a knowing look, and said, "Yeah, more like surviving the nightmare." We both laughed, but it got me thinking, why is living the dream such a default answer, even when it's obviously untrue? I'd been using that phrase to mask how miserable I was, stuck in a job I hated, barely making ends meet, and feeling like life was passing me by. That little exchange hit harder than I expected. I started making small changes, updated my resume, picked up a hobby, and even made new friends. Slowly, things improved. Now, when someone asks how I'm doing, I don't fake it. Sometimes I say great, sometimes not so great, but either way, it feels more honest. Turns out, living the dream starts with ditching the lie. Story 22. I've always been the kind of person who leaves texts unread for days. It's not that I don't care. I just get overwhelmed. One day I was catching up on messages and realized I hadn't responded to a friend's invite to her birthday dinner 3 weeks ago. Feeling guilty, I sent my usual excuse. "Sorry, just saw this." She replied, "No worries," but I could tell from the tone of her next message that she wasn't buying it. I brushed it off until a mutual friend mentioned how hurt she was that I hadn't shown up. That's when it hit me. My habit of forgetting to respond wasn't just inconvenient, it was alienating people. From that moment, I made a rule for myself. No more excuses. If I can't make it to something or don't want to go, I just say so. And if I genuinely forget to reply, I own up to it without pretending I hadn't seen the text. It's been a game changer. My friends appreciate the honesty, and I don't feel like I'm constantly scrambling to cover up my social slip-ups. It's not always easy, but it feels a hell of a lot better than living in a web of small lies. Story 23. It won't take long, my roommate said when he asked me to help him assemble a new bed frame. Famous last words. 3 hours later, we were still sitting on the floor surrounded by screws and cryptic instructions, arguing about whether Step 7 required washers or not. At one point, I got so frustrated I almost bailed, but I couldn't leave him in the middle of the mess. By the time we finished, it was close to midnight, and both of us were exhausted. The kicker. He looked at the fully assembled frame and said, "You know, I'm not sure I like it." I swore I'd never fall for the "it won't take long" lie again, but let's be honest. Next time he asks for help, I'll probably still say yes. Some lies, even the obvious ones, are easier to forgive. Story 24. I've always been someone who says, "I'm fine," even when I'm anything but. It's not that I want to lie. It just feels easier than admitting I'm struggling. Last year, though, that little lie nearly swallowed me whole. My dad had passed away suddenly, and I was completely blindsided. I took a week off work, and when I came back, I thought I'd be able to keep it together. Every morning, coworkers would ask, "How are you doing?" And without fail, I'd plaster on a smile and say, "I'm fine, thanks." Inside, I was a mess, barely sleeping, barely eating, and constantly on the verge of tears. But I was so determined to keep my grief private, to avoid being the sad person everyone tiptoes around. It all came to a head one Friday during a team meeting. My manager asked me for an update on a project, and I blanked. I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd completely forgotten about it. The room went silent as I mumbled an apology, and that's when my coworker Sarah said, "You don't have to do this, you know. It's okay to not be fine." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't even remember what I said after that, but I know I left the meeting and went straight to the bathroom to cry. When I came out, Sarah was waiting. She handed me a cup of tea and said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." That was the first time I admitted out loud that I wasn't fine. I told her everything, how I felt like I was drowning, how I didn't know how to cope, how I was terrified of letting people down. She just listened, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. After that, I stopped pretending. When people asked how I was, I'd say, "Not great, but I'm getting through it." Some people didn't know how to respond, but most were supportive. My manager even gave me some extra flexibility with deadlines, which took a huge weight off my shoulders. Now, "I'm fine" is a phrase I try to avoid unless it's true. It's scary to be honest, but I've learned that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's a way to let people in. And sometimes letting people in is exactly what you need to start healing.